Foreign companies are looking past Europe's woes and are making bets on its future. I'm Winnie O'Kelly, reporting for Business Day Live. Joining me now from Paris is reporter Liz Alderman, who wrote about rising confidence in Europe. Good morning, Liz. So we've got this bright sign amid all this gloom in Europe. How do multinational companies really feel about the long simmering Euro debt crisis?
Well, it's interesting. Despite sort of all of the negative headlines that continue to come out of this place, basically big multinationals are saying, you know what, it's actually not doomsday after all.
And how are they showing that? What's the demonstrative effect?
Well, what we have seen recently, after basically 2 years, 2008, 2009, a little bit of 2010, when foreign direct investment was way down, things are starting to pick up, at least with respect to the way that the big multinationals are investing. You've got big corporations like Dow Chemical, Google, Infosys, General Electric, pumping hundreds of millions of dollars into a variety of countries, whether it be a place like Ireland, where costs have actually gotten a lot more competitive as the crisis has borne down there, even in Spain. And a lot of companies, though, are still focusing their really big investments at the richest and sturdiest countries like Germany and France, which is quite interesting because all of that pattern still sort of highlights one of the big troubles here, which is a continued divide between the economies, the racier economies of the north and those of the south.
Right. So what about other smaller companies in France and Spain and Italy? Are they making these same kind of investments?
Well, despite the many headlines that seem to come out almost every day with respect to investments like, that Google is making hundreds of millions in Ireland, et cetera, there still does remain a problem here, which is that small and medium-sized businesses are having a lot of trouble getting financing. Many of them are reporting that they are facing sort of a major credit squeeze, despite the fact that a lot of the banks on the continent are insisting that they are still continuing to lend.
So now probably markets and investors are looking ahead to Thursday. That's when we expect to find out whether the creditors are voluntarily going to go along with this proposed Greek debt swap. If Greece comes up short, there could be a default that could trigger credit default swaps. So is there anxiety building?
Well, Greece, as you mentioned, is still one of the big question marks, despite the optimism that we're seeing by the big multinational companies. This Thursday is basically what we're looking at is effectively one of the largest debt restructurings in history here. And it will be a pivotal day for the Euro crisis because if what needs to happen is that the holders of Greek bonds, at least 75% of companies and banks that hold Greek bonds, need to decide whether they want to turn those bonds in for new ones that overall would help reduce Greece's debt by approximately 100 billion euros. If that doesn't happen, Greece would fall into a default, one that at this point is basically baked into the cake. Financial markets are probably not going to go completely bonkers about this because it would be something that would be expected to happen and actually wouldn't be a significant ripple effect.
And what do we think about big companies? Assuming all goes according to plan, or if it falls apart, will it have a big difference on what their long-term investment plans are?
Many of the biggest companies, their major concern is whether Europe over the years is actually going to turn around or whether it's going to stay in this rut that it's stuck in right now. And they're basically betting that things are going to get better. Despite the grinding austerity, the costs that is, heavy costs that is inflicting on a number of economies, many of the big multinationals still see Europe as really one of the largest investment and investment destinations and consumer demand, et cetera. And let's not forget also the attractiveness of Europe right now for big firms from places like China and India. It's a great time for them to go bargain hunting.
That's great, Liz. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Two media scandals are getting attention at the moment. The first involves talk radio host Rush Limbaugh and some controversial remarks he made last week. The second is a continuing scandal at News Corp that started out with revelations about phone hacking in Britain. I'm joined by two of our media reporters, Amy Chozick and Brian Stelter. Good morning.
Morning.
So Brian, Rush Limbaugh really seems to have put his foot in his mouth in the past week, where he referred to a young student who was supporting having health insurance pay for contraception as a prostitute and a slut. And now we're seeing the backlash. What does this mean for Rush?
You know, this firestorm came out of nowhere last week on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday on his radio show, biggest talk radio show in the country. Rush Limbaugh went after this woman again and again and again. Then on Saturday, he apologized, said he had the wrong choice of words, didn't mean to personally attack her.
So did that do it? Did that stop it?
It doesn't seem to have stopped this firestorm that's happened. He had about 6 advertisers that had pulled out of his show between the time that he started attacking the woman and by the time that he apologized. And since then, 2 more have said it doesn't matter that he apologized, we're taking our ads off the show anyway. This is a pivotal day because we're going to find out what he says on his show at noon. And we'll find out if more advertisers start to give into the pressure that's being applied by all these liberal groups that are opposed to him.
He's had this kind of problem in the past, though. This isn't the first time. What might be different this time?
What feels different is the power of social networking. We've read about this in the paper for the last year and a half, about these movements that can come out of nowhere thanks to the web. In this case, it's a pressure being applied to advertisers. And the people that have been opposed to Rush Limbaugh for 10, 20 years, they've got more power now to get their message out a lot wider than they used to. It doesn't mean that he's going to have a devastating blow to his career here, but it does make him at least uncomfortable right now.
But don't advertisers know that this is a guy who's famous for saying incendiary things? Because
That's
they know
why they
everything
sign
into.
up sometimes, right?
So I don't understand why they would be surprised that he said something.
I do think that's partly
incendiary.
why they keep using, some of them are using the word suspend their advertising instead of withdrawal, right? I mean, it's possible that a month from now, if this blows over, those companies will be right back. But it remains to be seen. When Glenn Beck was an object of this scorn of protesters 2 years ago, the advertisers didn't come back. So there's at least one case study that gives these protesters hope they can actually succeed.
All right, so we go from this fast-moving development to a much slower brewing scandal at the News Corp, which started off with phone hacking of celebrities and even the royal family, and has now broadened to include bribery of officials. James Murdoch has stepped down from the international unit. What does all of this mean for the whole broader company, News Corp?
Well, I think there's a sense when you're reading about this scandal that this is just taking down the whole company. But this is such a vast company, and newspapers are such a tiny part. So in a sense, News Corporation is kind of a sports and entertainment company with a newspaper problem. You know, it's really become that. And so a lot of investors are thinking, should they just spin off the papers, make it a separate publicly traded company?
But will that happen?
That will never happen because Rupert Murdoch loves newspapers. But there has been, discussions within the company about this. Chase Carey, the president and COO, said at a conference with analysts last week that there have been discussions about spinning it off. Of course, he's also stood by and said we're going to make these papers profitable, but that is because Rupert Murdoch loves them, not necessarily because they're the best thing for the company right now.
But they wouldn't necessarily have to spin off all their media properties, right? I mean, the Wall Street Journal and properties in the U.S. could be very different than, he did close one London tabloid.
Thinking about spinning off Dow Jones. I mean, you have a real brand in the Wall Street Journal that you can leverage with television assets, and News Corp is doing that. But I think the British newspapers particularly make them into the Sun newspaper group, have Tom Mockridge, who's CEO, run a separate company. Investors would sure like that.
It might be interesting.
The parallel here is that these are two companies where they're having to deal with these crises in tiny parts of their businesses, right? And Clear Channel has been trying to diversify to become more like News Corporation. Clear Channel owns a bunch of radio shows like Rush Limbaugh's, or that licenses and distributes Rush Limbaugh's show. And they're trying to diversify. They're trying to get into TV. They're trying to promote their billboard business. They're trying to point out that radio is only a piece of their company. News Corp pointing out that newspapers are only a tiny piece of their company, right? It's almost comically small.
A tiny, very vocal piece, exactly.
But the difference with News Corp, perhaps, is it's not just a reputation issue. There is talk that there can be criminal charges. What's next in that piece?
Well, there already have been, and I think the bribery is almost worse than the phone hacking because that could trigger the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act in the United States, where a U.S. company bribes foreign officials. So they definitely have a real problem, not just an image problem, but a genuine problem on their hands in the UK, and they're trying to take care of that. I mean, James, giving up his position, I think, was part of that, distancing himself from the problems there.
There was some speculation that a reason to do that might be because he could be charged himself or brought back. Is that still a possibility?
I think it's all a possibility. It's moving pretty quickly. But I think he had taken this job as deputy COO in New York back in March. So they were always trying to transition him out of London. It was never, I think, something he was that interested in running. And so, this is kind of an evolution of what he was going to do anyway.
Okay. So what's the next thing that's going to happen with News Corp? What can we be looking forward to?
I think we just look for the next revelations in the hacking scandal. Will Rupert or James have to go testify again? And it's just kind of keep our eye on that.
British Parliament. And with Rush, what are we looking forward to?
We'll find out if more advertisers decide to withdraw. It's the sort of thing, we don't even know how many advertisers he has. That's been a real problem for the liberal activists that are trying to take him down. They don't know who to call. They don't know who to complain to. And so we'll find out today on his radio show if he actually addresses this scandal or if he pretends it didn't happen and he's already addressed it.
All right, so we'll be looking forward to more today. That's all for today. Please stay with us online at nytimes.com for our continuing coverage. I'm Winnie O'Kelly, reporting for Business Day Live. Thanks for watching.